There we go. All right, we are here. I am with Dr. Ken Schell, and we got a heavy topic today, so we're gonna dive right in. And thank you for joining me, Ken. Always a pleasure. What are we talking about today, Ken?
Well, we're talking about targeting, specifically targeting as opposed to racial groups, and it may be even more than that: racial, ethnic, cultural. The bottom line is this: people are looked at differently than as they who they are because of what they look like or their professed beliefs, things like that. One of the things I wanted to start out with was how I got started in being racially targeted, and that was August 11th, 1956. I was born. And an interesting story my mom tells me, um, I was born with red hair and blue eyes. And my mom's in the hospital, and the nurse comes into the room with me, and she looks at my mom, she looks at me, and she started to leave. My mom goes, "No, no, that's mine." And she goes, "Well," she said, "look at the wrist. That's why you put the band on it." And of course, the wrist matched my mom's. But that's the first opportunity I had, even though I wasn't aware of being profiled, as someone looked at me because I didn't fit their image of what I should look like relative to my mom. They were going to take me somewhere else. I'm not sure where, but they're going to take me away. Jump ahead 12 years. My parents, my dad specifically, had an opportunity to work in the defense industry out in California. We were living in New Jersey at the time. So we moved out to the San Fernando Valley up in the Los Angeles area. And for those who know Los Angeles now, the valley is pretty much multiracial, multicultural. At the time that I moved up into the valley, we were possibly the first or second African American family to move in, and certainly the first in our neighborhood. Um, I distinctly remember my dad taking me and my brother aside because we were both going to middle school, and he told me and my brother what to expect or what we might expect. And remember that we were above that. We were there to get an education and to take advantage of the opportunity that we were given. I had no idea what I was getting into. Um, I do remember that first day in class, we were taken up to the principal's office, interestingly enough, and we were escorted to our classrooms. When I got to my class, the vice principal was taking, he said, "Wait right here." He went in, I could hear him talking to the teacher. I couldn't understand what he was saying. And he came and says, "Okay, come in with me." I walked in, I could hear voices talking. When I walked into the room went just extremely quiet, somewhat like I was E.F. Hutton and everybody was listening. Um, it was interesting. I had a variety of feelings. None of them were positive, but I realized that I was there to get an education. Um, the first quiz in that class, I recall a lot of the students said, "What did you get? What did you get? What did you get?" And I said, "Well, I got an A." And they said, "You did?" As if they're expecting another result, especially those who didn't achieve as high a grade I did. What they didn't understand was the schooling that I'd had on the East Coast, I was actually a grade ahead of them. So the things that I was seeing were actually a repeat of what I had already experienced. And I was a straight A student when I was in elementary school in New Jersey. So this was a lot easier. That resulted in me being put in these special classes, which were experimental math classes, AP, higher education classes. And I wanted to be with just what I thought were the normal people, whatever that means. Jump ahead 2 years later, I was voted by the entire school to be president of the school. My kids kind of laugh at that story, but I was actually up in the valley last year. I decided to go by and check in my junior high. And I went and talked to the principal. I explained who I was, and he goes, "Wait a second." And he took me outside, and there's this big trophy case. And in there was a plaque that had the names of all the student body presidents back to the early 60s when the school was founded. And there was my name up there. So I took a picture and sent it to my kids because it does sound like kind of an unusual story. I mean, here I was, and this was back in 1968 to 1970. This was at a time when Los Angeles was going through a lot of social and racial unrest. And for me to drop into a school like that, and because of how I managed myself during that time, and it wasn't pleasant, I can tell you that, But I stayed focused on why I was there, to get an education, and the other things were a distraction. Getting into pharmacy school, I went to pharmacy school up in San Francisco, which one would think is relatively, I guess, accepting of all different races, colors, creeds, things like that. But it doesn't always include the police. And I recall I was a third year student, and just to set the scenario, I was student body president of UCSF at the time. And I had been studying late, and I was walking home down the street, lived about 12 blocks from campus. And I was walking past this apartment building when all of a sudden this car quickly drives up and pulls over on the curb. And I kept walking. Then I recognized it was a police car. Um, I was wearing a down vest. I had my 35-pound backpack with books in it. And a police officer gets out and he goes, I need to talk to you. And I said, about what? He said, well, there was a robbery here a couple hours ago. Where are you coming from? I said, oh, I'm a pharmacy student coming from UC San Francisco. And he said, what were you doing? I said, I was studying. And so he goes, well, there was this robbery, and I'm just looking around to see if the robber is still in the area. And I said, well, what does he look like? He said, well, he's about 5'6" or 5'7", had close cropped hair. At that time, I had a huge, monstrous Jesus afro. I'm 6'2", weigh about 220. Well, I weighed about 185 at the time. And so I go, I don't think I resemble that guy. And he goes, well, can you show me your backpack? And I said, okay. So I took off my backpack and I held it out for him. And he looked through it and he goes, can you take off your vest? And I went, I can do that. And I started to take it off, and he said, slowly. And it was the way he said it and the way he's looking at me, I realized this may not end well. And so I was extremely concerned for my safety, but I got the vest off. He looked at it. He didn't say anything. He just turned around and drove off. So then there's that. And I don't know if you've ever had the situation where your life was certainly passing for your eyes, but I immediately felt a sense of having survived something. And I wasn't angry at the time. I was curious because I couldn't understand why I was stopped when I had no resemblance to the person. Many hours later, why would the person be hanging around? So I'm walking back to my apartment. I'm about 5 blocks away at this point. So as I walk, the sense of relief starts to be replaced by a sense of anger. And by the time I got back to my apartment, I was furious. I called my brother, who was a law student at UCLA, and he's now general counsel at the Presidio Trust. And he was telling me, you should have got his badge number. You should have done this. You should have done that. I said, I just want to live. But it made me realize that, did I have any animosity towards the police officer? No. It was more anger at just in general a system which looks at people as images of past events or whatever. I told my roommate about it. He goes, they would never stop you. You're the student body president. I go, heck, I had no way of knowing that. But he was kind of laughing. He was Japanese American, and his dad had been, his parents had been incarcerated in internment camps. And so we were kind of sharing stories about how his parents felt and how I must have felt. I didn't tell my classmates that. And it's funny because at one of our class reunions, he was talking about me as a roommate. And he said, yeah, you should have seen him when he came home after being stopped by the police. And all of a sudden there was silence in the room. And all my classmates, no way, he got stopped. But there was a feeling that because people knew me as a person, they couldn't understand why I would be stopped just merely by what I looked like. And I realized this isn't just me. If you had been walking, let's say in Southeast San Diego, somewhere walking down a street, yeah, the chances of you being stopped are very high because you're an anomaly there. You don't look like you belong there. People who are wearing Muslim clothing that's clearly identifiable, if they're seen walking somewhere, People may be uncomfortable. I was on a plane where someone sat next to me. Actually, they sat in the middle seat between me and this other guy, and they were clearly wearing clothing that was not Western in its origin. And this guy was flipping out. You can see looking over me like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? We're going to sit here. We're going to enjoy the hour and a 20-minute flight. We're going to get off. And so when he got off, he pulled me aside. He goes, how could you be so calm? I said, what did you think was going to happen? He said, did you look at that guy? And I went, kind of, yeah, but he didn't look that good to me. I have no right to stare at him. But he was just concerned about this guy possibly blowing up the plane or whatever. I thought, why would he think that? He doesn't know this guy. So it's not just a matter of race, although in this country, race does play a part. And I'd be the first to acknowledge that. And it hasn't stopped. I've been stopped by the police driving a car. I had a Jaguar at one point. I was driving, I got pulled over for no particular reason. I was going to speed limit. And the guy said, I want to check your registration. And I knew that they can check your registration from their cars. He had me get out. Man, I was wearing a suit. And when I got out, because at the time, all you could see was the top of my head. When I got out in my suit, you could see the guy with that oh crap moment. It's like, But, I was friendly. I chatted with the guy. He asked me what music I was listening to. I say I was listening to Beethoven. And I could see him want to say, who's that? But he didn't. But it came to reflect, it didn't look like the right scenario. I was in a car that maybe wasn't usual for someone of my appearance. How do we get out of this is how I'm thinking. And it's happened to my brother too. He got stopped in Las Vegas. And again, here's a guy who's he had been working for Coca-Cola for 20 years as a vice president. He's now the general counsel up at the Presidio Trust in San Francisco. And he gets stopped by the police again for the same reason I did. He looked like someone they thought had done something wrong. This guy's 6'7", weighs 230. And again, the guy didn't fit the description, and he was very calm. He actually used to represent police in cases when he was working the prosecutor's office in San Francisco. And he said, I know what you guys do. I know what you're thinking, but he said, you should be checking your facts better. They handcuffed him, had him sitting down in the street, humiliating experience by any means. But you realize people are still caught in this, you look like, or you sound like, or something like that. And the only way I can feel that for me, what's worked for me for the last 40 years in pharmacy is to try to understand where this person's coming from. And this is why I talk to the police officer. This is why I talk to people. So what are you thinking? Why did you stop me? And they'll never acknowledge it, but then they start talking to you about their backgrounds and things like that. And I realize, oh crap. This is the first time really you've talked to a non-criminal or accused of criminal type person. You don't have the lens that I have over 40 years of talking to everybody, and I will talk to everyone. And to do that, it's given me that calm, that release that allows me to deal with situations like that and not be bitter and angry. I wouldn't transfer that on to me. My parents didn't transfer it on to me. And they grew up in the deep South back in the 30s. And you can only imagine the amazing crap they went through. They never told us. I didn't find out about this until about 5 years ago, all the stuff my parents went through. And I didn't ask them why didn't tell me those things, because I knew. And my dad said, we didn't want to burden you with what we had. He said, we could have achieved so much more if we didn't have that burden upon us. And so to push that burden even on the perpetrator, it's the same thing. So if I can somehow lift that burden from the person who's using racist or ethnic type derogatory remarks to make them feel like it's not okay, but I understand why you're doing it. And maybe you can help yourself by not doing that. Understand me as a person. I'm trying to understand you as a person. And right now I'm having a hard time. But to be able to do that, Sean, and not be bitter, and it's hard. And sometimes really bad things do happen. I'm sure it wasn't George Floyd's intent to get strangled that day, but you know, to not put myself in a position to be like that, to react with anger, because that's what they're expecting. You react with anger. I'm sure that cop would have been more than happy to push me to the ground if I had to start getting confrontational, which is what my brother wanted me to do when he was in law school, jump ahead for him 35, 40 years. And he stopped and he was very calm and rational, talk to police. And I almost want to say, did you get their badge numbers? Did you find out who they were? But I couldn't because I knew what he had gone through. And while he had not been stopped like that, he said, I finally get how you felt that day. And that's kind of vindication for me that I did do the right thing, that I'm able to talk to you about it today. But yeah, it's been a nice, interesting ride for me. And I can't complain with the outcome. Do I think it's fair? No. Do I wish other things had happened to me or happened differently for me? Absolutely. Would it have made me a different person? Yeah, it would have. And I'm not sure I would have been a better person. I think I'm a better person now because these things happened to me and I was able to process it. But I wouldn't want that for my kids. I wouldn't want them to have to go through this. I wouldn't want it for your kids. And we're coming on a time now where your kids may start having to deal with that kind of thing because, oh, you're white, you probably related to some slaver back like 400 years ago. And we're going to, talk down your kids and make them feel bad. I don't want that to happen. I want people to move forward with the understanding that, yeah, these things happen. And you know what? They're always going to happen as long as we're different as people. Things are going to happen. But to try and understand and not make them worse or project them into the future, I think we have a better chance of thinking it that way than to just perpetrating a system that it's not about getting even, because you'll never get even, by the way. It's always going to be cyclical if you do it. If you try to get even, then the next guy's going to get even. So let's not get even. Let's move forward, especially as professionals. And I've been grateful for meeting some of the most fantastic professionals in pharmacy, medicine, nursing, people like you that, all walks of life, great people. And I'm sure you've had your incidents or witnessed them too. And there are probably things that trouble you saying, I wish I had, or I'm glad I didn't. But I can't worry about that, Sean, because to me, you're a good person. And from that perspective, I just have to move on and try to make things better.
That's a lot of good stuff right there, Ken. I had about 4 different questions through there, but I didn't want to interject. But I love what you said about how you react and how you flip the script in the moment and just had more empathy towards that person and their lack of understanding, their ignorance, whatever it is, right? And just kind
Yeah.
of like put yourself in their shoes to help really diffuse yourself in that moment. Obviously, you could be scared in that moment, because, but it's like obviously, but no, that's fascinating, Ken. I think that's a valuable lesson for everybody. How about this? How about so with RPHL and having pharmacists and technicians within our community, like what advice would you give? Because I know a few months back, Dr. Richard Harris was on with us, talked about how he saw this all the time within hospitals and health systems, right? And it was like this unspoken code, since he was African American, that he just had to keep his head down and let everybody else get the promotions and the good positions, right? And he just had to do his job, type of thing. Like, any advice on that in that type of setting?
Yeah, and I think you work it one person at a time, because you're right. You get passive promotions. That certainly happened to me, where at least I felt that way. Um, you talk individuals. What I would do is talk to people and ask them, why do you think it wasn't me this time? They say, well, your time will come. I said, no, I get that part, but when do you think my time will come? And the risk they have, of course, and the risk that the path that I took was I left that organization. Um, you can't be afraid to leave if you try to make an effort. If someone says keep your head down because this just isn't for you, that's not the place you want to work. And the only thing that's really going to get people to change is when you make a conscious effort not to violently protest to it, but to protest in nonviolent ways. And one of the best ways to do that, because you know how talented you are, and they do too, by the way, um, when you leave, that tells a story and that affects people coming behind you. And I've seen that happen to me where I've left jobs where I've asked for resources, help, not gotten them. And then once I leave, all of a sudden the resources pour in. Do I feel like crap? I wish that hadn't happened. I wish that happened when I was there. Yeah, but I know I made it better for someone else coming forward. So it may not be your time. You may have to be the one that takes it, but I wouldn't take it forever. I wouldn't stay at a place for 10, 15 years that continually passed you over for promotion. And the only reason that you can identify is how you look or how you sound, what your religious beliefs are, whatever. Take a walk and you will get where you want to. And oh, by the way, that place will come back after you, as my place did, and they will promote you. But at that point, you have to say, yeah, it depends. I don't know if I want to come back or not. It's hard, Sean. That's the most brutal thing ever when you know. And you do know. I mean, I've been doing this since seventh grade. You can tell when someone looks at you when they're thinking about you that way. And you realize, how do I change this person? How do I do it? And it takes a long time, but it does happen.
Great advice. How about, we got 5 minutes left here. How about let's dive into, let's say, oh gosh, where do we start? You got me speechless, Ken. This is good.
No,
This is,
you got one. You just
yeah.
don't want to say it. I mean, this is it's a really difficult subject to bring up because of the way culture is in this country now. There's some things that you want to say that you can't say because you know they'll be misinterpreted by somebody, and then someone say, "I can't believe you said that to that guy. Oh, you heartless bastard." You know, I don't. I wish people could be more open with what they're thinking and not have to fear retaliation because you don't represent the common thought of the day, the political correctness, if you want to use that term, or, cancel culture or woke or whatever you want to say. It has suppressed our ability to communicate with each other in a thoughtful way about issues such as this. And you can't get understanding when the other person is fearful. That's what causes the misunderstanding, is when that person fears you. And for you to not be able to ask any question of me that you want, and by the way, you can. I've got nothing to hide. I won't be defensive. I won't think you're crazy or I'll never talk to you again. But you should be able to ask it. And there's some questions that I would want to ask you. And I know, oh God, no, I'd never say that to him. And I think, why? Why? Because, well, what if someone overhears us? What if he thinks differently of me because I say that? Is it really worth it? And then I start thinking, nah, it's not worth it. I don't need to know that information. And so I don't ask the question. But maybe someday down the road, I will need that information. And it may be important to you that I know that. But I don't ask the question because I'm concerned with the perception of others.
Yeah, I think that's the second time I've heard that, because actually Dr. Harris said that as well last time. It's ask questions. It's talk to you about things, right? Ask you questions like we did last time we talked, Ken, like when we met. It's like, okay, what happened? Like, how did you get targeted? Like, how was it growing up for you, especially moving into, predominantly white neighborhood, right? So it's good to have those conversations to get the ball rolling and just get those perceptions out there. So I can never look through your lens, but I can at least ask questions to see how you had felt and how you had handled things. Interesting. Okay.
And Sean, it's funny that you say that because I think that's an important point. Once people realized that I wasn't going to be offended or react in a negative, violent way, all sorts of people started coming up and asking me questions that other people might find extremely provocative or thoughtless or just stupid. But I would talk to them, explain to them how someone might be offended by how they might feel, and they walk away educated with a different point of view. But had I not reacted in a calm fashion, they would not come to me again. Plus, they would go to their friends and say, "Oh God, I said this. It was an accident, but boy, he just bit me a new one." It doesn't help to get angry all the time. There are times when anger does help. I can't say that it doesn't, but for I'd say 99% of the time, it's making people feel comfortable around you that will start the understanding the flow.
It's awesome. I love it. I love it. So parting words, I want to try to recap this. If you're like Ken, you want to react, like if you get stopped in a situation, react with empathy. I mean, would that be what you would want to say, or how would you want someone to react if they are targeted and they're kind of caught blindly or blindsided?
You couldn't have said it better. React with empathy. I'm not saying just roll over and lay on
Yeah.
the ground with but react with empathy, not with anger. Empathy and understanding are the cornerstones of safety for everybody, including the police officer, by the way. If you can react that way, your outcome will be better. My opinion. Shouldn't say that. For me, it has been better because I've reacted with calm empathy and understanding.
That's amazing. And then for health professionals, pharmacists, pharmacy technicians, anybody in a professional environment where you're getting overlooked, I don't want to tell anybody to leave their job, but one thing that you said that kind of I'm going to come back to is like a civil way to protest would be to like, all right, go find yourself a different job. And I would always recommend find a job before you leave. Number one, trust me on that one. Got laid off on 9/1. What is it? It's April 4th here. Okay, good, Ken. Well, I'll tell you what, this has been awesome, Ken. Thank you so much. This is going to be posted in the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging channel in RPH Ally. If you want to connect with Ken or carry on the conversation, ask Ken questions, find him there. And we'll, if you're not part of RPH Ally, join at rphally.com. And we hope to keep this like session going, Ken, within that channel and to see if we can ask more questions, find more empathy, and just make it better for everybody.
Oh, totally right, Sean. And that's why I'd say join RPH Ally. It's an opportunity, a platform for you to surface things that you may not always feel comfortable doing. We're certainly an open, honest group, and we'll help you to work through whatever challenges or opportunities that you have.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Schell, thank you so much. We will see you next time.